Hello and welcome to the session Transforming Qualitative Research, Real-World Lessons in AI-Powered Analysis with CoLoop and STRAT7. My name's Emily and I'm an editor at Quarks. Before we get started, I want to go over a few ways that you can participate in today's discussion. First, you can use the chat tab to interact with other attendees during the session. Second, you can use the Q&A tab to submit questions for our speakers during the session. This session is brought to you by CoLoop. Please enjoy the presentation.
Brilliant. Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's session. My name is Jack. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at CoLoop, where we're building the AI co-pilot for insights and strategy teams. If you haven't heard of us, CoLoop is an analysis tool built specifically for insights work, particularly qualitative, and today we're used by more than 400 teams globally across agencies and brand side. Today we are very fortunate to be joined by Andrew Dare of STRAT7. Andrew, over to you. Would love to hear your introduction.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. Hello everybody. So my name's Andrew Dare. I'm the global CTO for STRAT7. I'm responsible for all the technology that we deploy across the group, but recently created an AI strategy lab within the organization where we're doing a combination of building our own tooling, but also then looking for partners in our AI ecosystem. And CoLoop's one of those prominent partners. We've been working with them for some time and we had some really great results from using the tool. So obviously Jack and I will discuss that as we move forward, I think.
Wonderful. Great. So yeah, I guess to frame the conversation right now, unless anyone watching has been perhaps living under a rock, the market research space is going through a huge amount of change. Specifically on the qualitative and the insight side, teams today are under growing pressure. Qualitative sample sizes are getting larger. There's more pressure to provide data and analyze data in more and more formats like video and audio across different languages on more and more compressed timelines, and overall clients, research teams, related functions are expecting more evidence-backed insights delivered faster and to a high level of quality. At the same time, manual qualitative synthesis remains incredibly time-intensive. In project briefs that we've seen, around half the research time can be spent on manual synthesis work. AI now presents a real opportunity not to replace researchers, but in fact to reduce the heavy lifting so that those researchers can devote more of their time and more of their mental margin towards value-add tasks like strategy, communication, deliverables, and storytelling to make sure that those insights actually drive significant impact on the stakeholders and clients that they're being produced for on behalf of. Today, we're going to talk through two STRAT7 case studies, one in pharma and one in fintech. And we're going to use these in conversation to explore how AI has helped to reshape the process and enable new levels of quality, efficiency, and insight generation using AI as part of the process. So in the first case study, we're going to look at a global pharma client and a project run by STRAT7. So, Andrew, do you want to jump in maybe and give everyone an overview about what this project was about and what the kind of impacts and kind of concerns were here?
Yeah, sure. So as Jack said, this was for a global pharma, and what they were trying to do was basically make sure that their partner organization across 15 different regions, well, across the global regions, was working effectively. And so what that meant for us really was to go out and perform in-depth interviews in each of those regions, obviously bring all that information back together and then create a bunch of insights so that we could present back to the customer to say, look, these are things that are working, these are things that aren't working. So as you can imagine, quite an interesting challenge for us really.
Absolutely. And I guess with these sort of large pharma projects, I mean, you're dealing with multi-billion-dollar supply chains. I know it's an industry where collaborations and partnerships are absolutely fundamental to driving success and producing very complex products and offerings in the space. What was the kind of complexity around this, and like how would you guys have sort of approached something like this in the past?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, complexity-wise, the fact that there's, it's across multiple time zones in multiple regions. We had 15 in-depth interviews to work through, and typically what we would have done in the past, we would have done the interviews, and an analyst would have looked at all those interviews. We worked through all the transcripts, noting out the things that were really, really interesting. It takes a long time to do that effectively. And if I'm being honest, from a research perspective, it's pretty boring, right? Because you're wading through a lot of information to get through the nuggets. That's where they are. So using a tool to do that really changed the game for us. It really did, because basically what happened was that we effectively pushed all those transcripts into CoLoop and said, look, I want you to look for information, look for nuggets around a very specific structure. And in doing that, we were able to bring insight out quickly, to find nuances of things that we may not have picked up because of the sheer volume of stuff that we were working on. So in the end, in terms of the researchers, the idea is that we're using the tool basically to accelerate our thinking. So get us to a place where we can actually apply our storytelling and our true insight, because we're not having to process the data to find those nuggets. Those nuggets were being surfaced by CoLoop. It worked really well.
Definitely. And I guess with these pharma projects as well, I imagine that the types of folks who are able to engage with this information and understand the nature and the context of it, they're going to be, specialists, senior folk who, where that level of expertise really matters. And so, with that in mind, these are, on top of it being technical subject matter, these are some of your best people, right? Who, are putting extraneous amounts of effort into working through quite a lot of information here.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, those people really are employed for their analytical skills. They're not paid to sit and look at transcripts and find things that look interesting. So for us, it was fabulous. The analysts still reviewed, the things that came out, if you like, the insights that were generated. But at the end, they ended up doing a lot less of the heavy lifting in terms of finding those things. And for us, very much seeing CoLoop as the time amplifier. It's not a shortcut. Work still has to be done. It just means that you get to those insights a little bit quicker, a lot quicker. And that allowed us to spend more time on the final outcome, on those insights, and genuinely delight the customer.
Yeah, I like that expression, time amplifier. I think often with a lot of AI tools in service-driven industries, across even other areas like legal and accounting, there's always a tension where it's something that's always been built essentially based on time-based sorts of outcomes, and so it's a difficult subject to broach sometimes in terms of efficiencies. But I think you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of what value actually means, and what we see across our other customers too, which is what it unlocks in terms of how you can redeploy that time on the project to really focus in on driving quality and driving good outcomes for the client.
Yeah, for me, it's the quicker time to insight. If it sounds like a cliche, but actually it's important, right? If we know that we're going to get good quality data without having to trawl through all the transcripts, we can then start to think about what the structure of that looks like. We can spend more time thinking about what the final analysis looks like than we would have done, because we would have been potentially constrained by the time that we've used on the transcripts, or the fact that we've had to use, other people to do the transcripts, then we're asking what that really meant. Where did that come from? The fact of the matter is, we can get to that very quickly, and it allows those senior people to sit down and genuinely think about what it is we're going to present forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually a theme across, I would say, different applications within, across different AI tools as well, around that point around amplifying and, making sure that, as we sort of discussed, like your top strategists, your people that know the space and the client really well, are actually sitting in a driving seat, and are then able to kind of orchestrate and amplify their time rather than, spending it on tasks that could be automated.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about replacing researchers with AI. What we're talking about is one of my colleagues coined this really well, and I really liked it, which was we're raising the base count.
Yeah.
So, we're getting to a point where you're starting in the process where you've got more to go at rather than having to start at the very bottom and gather all that data together. Really, really interesting, I think.
Yeah. So I suppose, finally in the end, then, what was the what was some of the sort of key learnings and things that really came out of this for the client, and how did it kind of make a difference to you guys?
Well, I think, in terms of key learnings, I think for us, it was one of those, early projects. So I think we definitely learned some stuff anyway there, really. Again, back to the point about it being an amplifier, it doesn't replace experience. It doesn't replace skill. It just allows you to get to a place very quick. Again, sometimes I think with any of these AI products, context is king. So, looking at things in isolation doesn't work, and that's back to the skill of the researcher. That's why the researchers look at that data, and that's why they analyze it, because it's all about context. But ultimately, using AI purposely, so you're working to a purpose, exactly what you're trying to achieve, massively increases the speed to insight and actually allows you to do stuff without compromising the quality of what you're trying to do. It really does.
Definitely. Cool. So we're going to move on to our next case study now. And this one was a fintech brand launching a new tax filing feature. However, this didn't sound like it was your kind of standard request. Andrew, do you want to speak maybe about the sort of context around this one?
Yeah. So as you say, it was people wanting to get some understanding about their new tax filing feature, getting people to use it and everything else. The only problem was that we didn't really have very much time at all. In fact, the time was measured in days, and it was a very interesting and challenging thing to do. So in the end, we ended up doing, 8 qual interviews, basically talking to people about what we were going to do, but we did that over 3 days. So we were doing quite a lot of in-depth interviewing over a short space of time, 3 days. Obviously, when you were doing that traditionally, you'd end up spending quite a lot of time just doing the transcriptions, right? So you'll do an interview, and it may take you maybe a day before you even get a transcript back. So the 3 days to do all the interviews and have it transcribed, was a blessing at the very beginning. But what made it even better was after that, the customer said, well, actually, once you finish the field work, we really want some answers back in 24 hours because we don't have much of time here. So of course, all the delights that you want to take, right? So you don't have long to do the interviews, and by the way, you've not got very long to do the insight. I would say, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, I think without CoLoop, we wouldn't have been able to achieve it. Or if we did, people would be burning the midnight oil and past. So, having a tool that, as I said earlier, allowed us to surface insights very quickly, allowed us to get to the heart of the data without having to wade through it ourselves, really, really made a difference there.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's an interesting one as well, because I suppose similar to the pharma projects, it's something that's incredibly high leverage in terms of the research value, right? I can imagine this is a company with potentially millions of users. You're launching a new feature. It's incredibly stressful for all of the product teams. You want this thing to go well, and you're bringing in someone like STRAT7 because you want a pro to come and help you figure out exactly how to make that conversion on your messaging as high as possible.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we very much, we're very much only as good as our last research project, right? So we can't afford slip-ups. We don't want to put substandard work to our customers because it just doesn't. It's not sustainable as a business. I mean, at the end of the day, after 24 hours, we managed to produce a 50 slide deck that had all kinds of insights and allowed them to move forward. as I said before, we couldn't have done that in 24 hours. So again, the customer was impressed with the output, with the speed of it, but not just the speed, because it's no good doing it quickly if what you've produced is rubbish. But they were impressed with the quality of it, and it really helped their business move forward.
Definitely, and I think again, it seems like another interesting example as well of one where putting that kind of pressure on a team, although they might be able to service that project in 24 hours, doesn't necessarily mean that they, just because they're able to sort of go through it themselves, that the quality would be preserved on those compressed timelines. And so it sounds like in this example, like having some process automation here gave your team some breathing room to actually make sure that they did a really good job of this.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice analogy. It gave them breathing room. Having said that, I suspect if you spoke to the team separately, they would say, well, it would have been nice to have more than 24 hours to actually analyze the output and genuinely leverage the expertise that we have. But I think in terms of where they wanted to be, the tooling allowed them to get to that place where they could devote time on it, because otherwise they'd just be spending the time creating decks, doing transcriptions, doing the mechanisms of the research, not actually the research itself. So I think that's I think that's a really interesting point, which it allows you to go through the mechanisms, but quickly, so that you've got time then to sit down and do the thought leadership, the things that you can't do with an AI. You can't draw those conclusions of things together. So it allows you to get to that place a lot quicker than it would do normally.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about, qualitative in particular as well is it is a real discipline in thinking. And when we've done our own qualitative research, I don't think you can ever overstate the importance of actually having the time to run discussions and talk to the other moderators and just go through the different permutations of what it could mean. And with something like message testing, I'm guessing you're going to be turning around some recommendations at the end around either what to go with or how it should be adjusted, or recommendations for which to split test. And so the value in that, it is fundamentally creative on some level, how you kind of get to those strategic recommendations. And nobody functions well half cut on a sort of like late night deadline trying to turn a 50-page deck around like that.
No, and that's the point, right? I think that the expertise and the experience to be able to provide that insight, whether it's 5 slides or 50 slides, doesn't come quickly. People learn these things over time. So for us, and this is the important thing, and has always been, we talk about human in the loop here, but for us the important thing is that we're using the experience of our researchers tied to the tools to get them to that place quicker. So the idea is that, again, it's not just about speed, but it's about speed and quality, because the quality of the output then allows the researchers to put the quality time in to then generate the insights. I mean, okay, a 3-day interview schedule and a 24-hour turnaround is not ideal, but at that point, then I think the customer then realizes where they are, and what you're doing at that point is you're delivering something where you can then say, right, if we want to refer we can run projects at leisure. But it's getting you to a point where you can make those discussions and have those decisions as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the impacts as well, one of the outcomes we were discussing in preparing for this that I thought was really interesting too, was this point around the client reaction. And one thing you said earlier was, around as an agency, right, you're as good as your last project in terms of how those clients perceive you. And I think one thing that really stood out here is the fact that you guys were able to leave a really great impression as well, which is so important in the agency space.
Yeah, absolutely. And even 6-8 months ago, we wouldn't have been able to do it, right? As I said, we probably, if we really were pushed, we could probably get a report out. but who knows what the quality it would be. And it would be very difficult for us to release something that's subpar quality as well. That's the other point, right? So as a business, we don't want to release stuff that's not the best of qualities. So it would have been a real struggle for us in terms of meeting the deadline, but then also understanding that maybe something not as complete as it could be. Whereas having tooling to support that, we managed to get a much more complete picture out than we would have done normally. I think for us, it was almost reputation saving because we managed to achieve something. The customer was very happy at what we achieved, not just the speed, but also, the insight that was given and the depth of that insight as well. How did you manage to find all this in 24 hours? Well, that's how we did it.
Yeah, that's it. It's that kind of magical experience you get to give them. And I think one other thing you mentioned there too as well is that, anyone who's run a research project on compressed timelines, it's the most frustrating thing too as well, where, thinking back about it later or after that submission deadline, after the decision's been made, like, there was more juice to squeeze out the lemon if you just had a bit longer to play with the data. And I think, minimizing that at the very least, that's, the level of craftsmanship that you want to be able to elevate people to, so that they, perhaps don't feel like that so often.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's really important that the researchers are really happy with the output from the tools, and they can depend on it and they trust it. And then they know then that they can apply their thinking and their expertise to do a really great job. I think that's really important, because you're absolutely right. The last thing you want to do is, I missed that, or if I'd have had a bit more time, I would have maybe chased that a little bit further. I think, that's always going to happen, right? Let's not, this is not going to fix every problem. It's always going to happen. But actually, it does give people more time to kind of chase those things.
Yeah, it's such a familiar feeling. I wanted to wrap up then with a couple of key learnings and best practices across these, and these are kind of three key points that sort of stood out when we were preparing ahead of running this talk. So the first one I wanted to talk about was around integrating AI early in the process, and one of the recommendations we've seen come up time and time again from folks that have used honestly many different types of AI products is really around making sure that they're integrating AI early and starting to think about how they're structuring data, how they're capturing it, how they're tagging it in order to maximize those benefits. So yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Andrew? And how does that kind of map onto your internal advice at Strat7? How you guys operate?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've learned going on. Is, what's the best mechanism? What's the best structure for things to go into the tool? There is that age-old IT garbage in, garbage out, and it applies just as well. If you don't understand the data that you're putting in, if you don't mark it and tag it appropriately, you're probably not going to get the best out of the tools. So yeah, I think it's really important, and I think that's the whole thing about research is changing, and I think there will be more focus on that, how we get that data, how we structure that data, and understand the things that we need to do to use AI effectively.
Definitely. I think that kind of ties into this next point here as well, which is around balancing AI with human oversight. So, a strong theme that kind of came out through these case studies and the other ones we looked at is that the role of the researcher as that kind of guide and that sort of interpretive layer around what's going on here, and the requirement to really validate outputs and make sure that interpretation aligns with the stamp of quality that you want to be broadcasting to all your clients and in any of the projects you run is super important. And Strat7, massive household name in the sort of research space, and obviously reputation's very important for you guys. How do you balance AI with human oversight and make sure that you're getting those efficiencies without, while still producing the same great product people know you guys for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey, right? And it's a journey that we're still on. We're in such a different place from when we first started this stuff. But ultimately, and when we started, and again, when I started the AI lab, one of the things that we said was non-negotiable from the beginning is having that AI in the loop, having everything centered around enabling a person to do the job. You know, and that's what we did all along. So that's where we've kind of got to, but people are now starting to trust the tool more. They're starting to understand how data needs to go into the tool. So I think things are, you know, they're kind of gradually improving all the time. I don't think we were in a bad place to start with, but I think we're getting better all the time, and people are now actively wanting to use CoLoop for stuff where we picked a specific project size, and then we've got more and more people wanting to use it. So I think that's a really great sign. I genuinely do. So
definitely. I know the folks at Quirks are warning us that we are 4 minutes from the end. So on to the final point around scale and collaboration. And you've spoken there about AI in the loop and humans being the driver of that. Collaboration is something that, you know, it's really important. We mentioned earlier this concept of, you know, qualitative and a breathing space, being able to have discussions with people who are involved. What is that? How are you guys approaching that? How do you tend to collaborate? Like how does that work now with AI?
Yeah, so I mean, the tool itself allows us to collaborate because multiple people can work through a single version of the, you know, to see a project. But I think more than that, it's also about giving you airspace to do that collaboration, to sit down and actually just talk about what you found. So did you see that? Oh, what about that? Did you think about that? Those are the things that you don't always get a chance to do. So it's a combination of the tooling actually allowing you to collaborate, but also giving you that space and that bandwidth then where you can actually sit down and talk about things a lot more. I think that's something that's sometimes underestimated. You know, it's like it's allowing us to talk. It's allowing us to talk and to chat about what we find. There's a whole nuanced load of stuff that happens there because we're getting to the speed of insight. We're getting to that so much quicker. I think it enables a lot of things.
Definitely. And I know from my own experiences too, we use our own tool for product research. One thing that's super powerful when it comes to collaboration in any meeting, if, you know, someone has an idea, a thought, they remember something, just being able to dial that up quickly and retrieve the information and have that discussion in real time, you know, rather than having to say, maybe let me get back to you on that once I've thumbed through everything again and tried to find that reference. Incredibly powerful, and I think just gives people the ability to move at the speed of thought like that.
Yeah, it's that, as I said before, it gives people the space to actually think, but it also gives them the space to chat. I think really interestingly, just looking at the quote from Luke, you know, it's not, we said this all along, but it's not a substitute for human analysis, but enables us to get across the data and confirm, validate, and sense check our findings. That ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about being able to get to those insights, but also then make sure that the thinking that you're putting in it ties up with what the data is showing. I think that, you know, I think that's kind of the key here.
Absolutely. Andrew, thank you so much for joining. I've really enjoyed preparing this and running this talk. I know we have about 1.5 minutes left for a Q&A, so we'll hand back over to the Quirks team.
Thank you. Yeah, if we want to just touch on one piece of advice you would give to teams that are just beginning to experiment with AI in qualitative research.
Andrew, do you want to go first?
I'd say make sure people stay in the loop and use it as a tool to enable people.
Absolutely. And for me, I would say definitely keep an open mind, try things out. I think that, you know, it's a sort of process that, you know, has a lot of kind of traditional approaches. It's one that's been, you know, fairly consistent over the years. And I think AI is a really exciting moment that, you know, people who are in research, who are involved in innovation should really be, you know, getting stuck into and making the most of.
Well, thank you, Jack and Andrew, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for listening.
Brilliant.